We're good. So, everyone, welcome. This is Bruce Sanguin, and we're going to chat about the slow drip of disclosure and how to stay grounded through these crazy times we're living through. And I'm going to let Bruce introduce himself. I'm really, really honored to have him sitting with us tonight. It's been a while since I've seen Bruce, and he has longer hair, and everything else is the same. So, I'll you, Bruce.
Thanks, Keith. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on your little program tonight, and looking forward to the conversation. I'm a psychotherapist living in Victoria, British Columbia, right now. Part of what I do is I also work with psychedelics when it seems appropriate. Um, so I guess psychedelic psychotherapy, and we're still working out what that means. I spent a lot of time in the church, first career, and took early retirement from that about 7 years ago, and wrote a bunch of books then, and wrote a book about my own healing journey with various psychedelic medicines um, in this new period of my life. And I've been friends with Keith, I think, through both those periods. I think you caught me at sort of right at the end of my first
Mm-hmm,
career,
mm-hmm,
as I was transitioning and feeling
mm-hmm.
like I was nobody, and I
Yeah.
had nothing to hold on to, and trying to figure out what was next. So it's been lovely to be connected to you throughout all that. Yeah, so that's a bit about me.
No, thank you, Bruce. Yes. So I would show you his book, but I lent it out to a client recently. So maybe you have a copy that you can show us later. That Dismantled. It's a great book, the latest one. I haven't read the others, Bruce. I have to admit, but there are many.
Yeah. Well, it's different language in that, in
Yeah.
different, different. Yeah. So,
Well, they're equally brilliant. I know and I've heard, but I haven't delved in yet. So,
hmm.
anyways, I'd love to ask you a little bit about that transitional period
Hmm.
and your own experience, what you're willing to share, like what brought you to this deep understanding of trauma, and obviously you were already in counseling people through your role as a minister, um, but what made you want to do it full time and in this way with psychedelics?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So, during that career in the minute, even though I was still had accreditation as a therapist, I wasn't practicing too much. And I would say I wasn't really trauma informed during that period. That all came about because of, I started going to ayahuasca ceremonies and discovered my own trauma. And I was surrounded by people who were into their trauma. And it just felt like, oh my God, everybody's dealing with trauma, and that trauma is intergenerational and
Mm-hmm.
it's ancestral. And that was my awakening. It wasn't through reading books. It was like I went deep into my own suffering that I had managed to avoid and deny and repress for so long. And with the help of this lovely and merciless and loving medicine, uh, it was all revealed. And then I also entered into a psychotherapeutic relationship using psychedelic medicine, which kind of completed. Not that it's ever complete, but
Mm-hmm.
so that was my experience. And then based on my own experience of trauma, and like I was just the medicine showed me what the human experience is like from the perspective of trauma, and how we can spend a lifetime compensating for it unconsciously. Um, and then I started doing some reading of other people, but essentially I would say the medicine, just based on my own experience, kind of gave me what I needed to know about
Mm-hmm.
trauma and its impact on how we live our life, or how we like don't live the life that's truly our own because of trauma.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so would you be willing to share one sort of specific experience, either on or off medicine, with regards to fear, shame, or anger, where you felt you unearthed something you didn't know was there in your body, and how that what the impact was later on your life in terms of power and feeling more whole or more complete? Is
Sure.
there one thing that jumps out? One thing you're willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I went to Mexico to a place called Jalapa and did I was there ostensibly as the integration expert. That's what I was invited to do, but I found out like shortly before the first ceremony that I was expected to be in ceremony, take the medicine, and then be up all day listening to people's experience and helping them to integrate. But that experience for me, it was like 10 ceremonies night after night, back to back, and it was very revealing and very painful. That's where I got in touch with how with what I'll just call the depth of sorrow within my soul. And I found myself crawling around on the jungle floors, muttering to myself and anybody who would listen, I'm a motherless child. I was totally regressed. I was about a year and a half old in this regression. I was just barely crawling. And but the language was, I'm a motherless child. I'm a motherless child. And I saw all how devastated I was by my mother's inability or unwillingness to attune to me emotionally, to be tender and compassionate with me, to love me. I just experienced this failure of love, which was associated with unbearable feelings. It was like I understood then why I repressed it, because this was an inconsolable state. And then I saw in a flash, the way you can in these medicines, how I compensated for that lovelessness by structuring an entire personality, just call it the ego, to compensate, to find a way to survive the lovelessness, because um, at core, like I've come to early conclusions about the nature of myself and reality, and I just call them core unconscious beliefs that I was bad, it's my fault, I don't belong, I don't want to be here, I'm helpless, I'm powerless, I'm responsible for your misery, speaking to my mother, and these all were repressed. But I carried them with me into adulthood, and under any kind of stress, any kind of circumstances that would trigger those, I would default to those early feelings that were associated with these beliefs that I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm illegitimate, I don't belong, I'm bad. And then what would ensue is just sometimes a week, sometimes 3 weeks of depression, moodiness, isolation, and totally out of control because I was unconscious that what was going on. Because what happens eventually is that these unconscious beliefs or conclusions that you came to as a 2-year-old or sometimes as an infant, even younger, they act eventually as interpretive filters for our experience. So the experience happens, they get filtered through these beliefs, and you end up at the same place, which is self-loathing, deep humiliation, deep shame for existing, for even existing, deep sense that you need to justify your existence because you actually are illegitimate. But on the other hand, you'll do anything that you have to do in order to be loved and accepted. And so the realization that was that for 55 years, my life hadn't been my own. I was living to receive the love that was not on offer. But I never gave up hope that if I was good enough, kind enough, charming enough, smart enough, big enough, small enough, entertaining enough, then surely someone would give me this love that I had missed out on.
Right. Now, some people manifest that kind of developmental trauma as addiction or addictive behaviors, what were some of the manifestations? You've alluded to them, but of how that showed up in your life. You said these 1 to 3 week periods of depression. What were some of the behaviors that you would find associated with those times?
Well, for me, I isolated myself. So there's a kind of a schizoid compensation for me where, when you initially experience these loveless conditions, what you actually feel is a homicidal impulse. You want to kill the other who is causing you pain.
Mm-hmm.
The dilemma is that you can't kill the other because you're dependent on the one who's causing you the pain to survive. So it becomes a suicidal impulse where you just want to disappear. So you either rid your life of the other, or you rid life of yourself. And so somewhere along that continuum between suicide and homicide, you you locate yourself, and the schizoid or isolating behavior is a way in which you put up a wall so that you are impenetrable, so that you can't connect, so that the other can't penetrate you. So for me, I was an isolationist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But the presentation of self to the world
Mm-hmm.
was of a charming guy,
Mm-hmm.
was of a intellectually bright guy,
Mm-hmm.
was of a good man, you
Mm-hmm.
know, so that you would not be able to tell that I wasn't actually letting you in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're a great actor.
I was a great performer, and that's why one of my favorite lines is the healing journey is about trading in the performance of good for the practice of true.
Mm.
And so one of the names I have for the ego is just or the egoic life is the performative life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where you're performing life rather than actually living your one true life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd love to transition soon to what the world is going through right now and how this all applies. But before I do that, um, how does that how does reclaiming that truth play out in your own life now in terms of how you feel on a day to day, and how your power can enable you to show up in service, maybe, or what changes have you felt?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the ego is a tricky little bugger, right? Because I was in service for 25
Yeah.
years,
Right.
right? But it was it was part of the performative self.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say exclusively, but that's that a lot of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the difference now is that you can use the metaphor of emancipation. In French, the root of that is main, or hand. You take your life in your own hands, so that you're free now to break out of the compulsion to perform, and rather consciously choose the life that you want to create for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go down this road of feeling depressed, or I'm starting to feel anxious or something, I have a mantra that I start repeating, and I'll say, I'm in a memory. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is a memory.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it doesn't matter what the trigger was in the current conditions of my life. If I go to that place of anxiety or depression or moodiness where I start to isolate, I
Mm-hmm.
can now take responsibility for it, because I know I set the whole thing up. And now I can say, look at what I'm doing that thing again.
Mm-hmm.
And once I truly believe that I'm in a memory,
Mm-hmm.
then I can go into a place of deep grief,
Mm-hmm.
if there's grief left to be grieved.
Mm-hmm.
And very often now I can just snap out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I can talk to my wife about it and say, geez, like I just, that dark place was really coming over me. I know what's going on, but that's how it got triggered. And I talk about it, and I'm free again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So It's not that you never get triggered. It's that the length of time it takes for you to, from the trigger to catch on to what's going on, goes from 3 weeks to 2 weeks to 1 week to 1 day to 1 hour to 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's a beautiful encapsulation of trauma. And I think in it, you've also illustrated that trauma can be, obviously many people on this call already know this, but trauma is not just physical abuse or sexual abuse repeated or very these many people just say I had a great childhood, no trauma, and there's a glossing over of what trauma can be and how intergenerational, for instance, the it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really good point, Keith.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I just call the nervous system doesn't distinguish between acts of physical violence and failures of love.
Mm.
The nervous system will respond in the same way, which is to just contract and shut down
Mm.
under both conditions.
Mm.
So when I hear part of the mechanism of denial that people use is that they'll often say, well, other people had it a lot worse than me, I should just get over it.
Mm.
So they're constantly comparing themselves to minimize
Mm-hmm.
their own trauma, which is a form of denial so that they don't have to actually feel
Mm-hmm.
how devastating it was as a little one and the ways in which they've compensated for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the goal is to become aware of your unique trauma signature
Mm-hmm.
so that you can take responsibility for it
Mm-hmm.
and end not only your own suffering, but the suffering that you're creating
Yeah.
by not taking responsibility for your trauma signature.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Okay, so how does this relate, if it does, to the moment that we're in right now with COVID and just everything that's happened in the last year? How has trauma been revealed or played a role in your clients or the people that you're seeing in the world are feeling and the challenges that they're facing right now?
Well, I mean, and I'm interested in hearing what you think about that too, Keith, because like, one philosopher I respect said that one of the things that every human being has to sort out is the question, is is reality for me, against me, or indifferent?
Mm-hmm.
And the effect of trauma is to basically cause us to proceed as if reality is against me or indifferent, but never for me.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is what hurts me. Others hurt me. I need to keep the world out because it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been through a year and a half here where mainstream media, certain medical authorities, the state, there's been a planetary sort of red alert telling us that there is this thing, this virus that's attacking us. The war metaphor, have been active. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a sense that if you haven't worked this through, then you're going to possibly go into your trauma reaction because it's going to reinforce that sense that you have
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously that other people are sources of danger,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like now we have to protect. We always had an intuition that other people were dangerous and we
Mm-hmm.
should be very careful. But now it's certain. You are my enemy.
Right.
You
Yeah.
breathe on me. You get too close to me. You don't you are the enemy, and I'm going to wall myself off from the world as enemy, the virus as enemy, other humans as threats to my survival.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we know that the suicide rate has increased. We know that the incidence of anxiety in younger children. I have clients who have children who are living through this period and trying to make sense of a world in which they can't have their friends over after school, who are manifesting all kinds of anxiety, agoraphobia. They're afraid to go outside. They're becoming more and more afraid of dogs, and it's very strange. Incidence of addiction has increased. So that's one way that I see how if you're contending with unconscious trauma at a time like this, then you're very vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah. So I agree with everything you've just said, and what's interesting to me is at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people liked the feeling of unity that came from having a common enemy, and many people remarked about how how unifying it was, when the world just went on pause and the airplanes stopped, and how nice that was to feel that everyone was on the same page. And yet there was an enemy, and that enemy hasn't gone away. It's shifted maybe a little bit. And so this war metaphor that you bring up is really, I think, fascinating, because it it creates polarity, and we lose the ability to see the gray, or to be able to be in community with differing opinions, or something beyond a divisive black-white conversation. So how, I guess, do you see that? But also,
Absolutely.
yeah. So if there is this, you said the universe was either indifferent, or reality was indifferent for you,
Or
or
against me.
against you. So if the reality is for you, let's play that scenario out. And people have this unconscious trauma that's being revealed through these times in a stronger way than maybe ever before in their life. What resources can they access to stay grounded, to move through that trauma without it becoming running the game, and them going unconscious? And how do you feel like people can combat that very slippery slope into an unconscious trauma reaction?
Yeah. Well, any kind of practice that is going to settle your nervous system. So it might mean, like, setting intentions to be with a friend or your lover or wife, husband, in a way that, where there's a lot of touch, there's a lot of comforting, just anything which calms the nervous system. The practice of meditation, taking time to just breathe and bring tender awareness to whatever's arising within you, come to sort of radical acceptance of. So it's just like, put yourself and be vigilant about creating safe conditions for yourself, where you feel safe, you can let down. I think those are critical practices. Find a way to maintain a sense of humor, like like have your favorite comedians, or watch things that are going to, like, one of the things that disappears in a contracted nervous system is the capacity to laugh, to just the capacity for joy. I think, if you're so inclined, getting out in nature, and the Japanese talk about the forest bath, but just being in the tender care of these giant trees, feeling the earth beneath your feet, and feeling into the support that is always already present, all the ways in which we are supported. We're given everything that we need in order to find rest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. I love all of those things. Leads me to many different questions, but the first one that came up for me was that observer state in meditation. How did you find the medicine journeys that you did allowed that observer state to come online stronger and allow you to hold space for difficult feelings in your own body, whether it's fear or anger, and how do you see that play out with your work with your clients?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my medicine experience, especially with ayahuasca, I mean, sometimes, it was important to actually go deep into the regression
Mm-hmm.
where you identify
Mm-hmm.
with just, for example, feeling I'm a motherless child. Like I had no witness at
Yeah.
that point. And I think in a strange way, it was important that I didn't have that distance. It's like I needed to know, oh, this is the shit.
Mm-hmm.
This is it.
Right.
And then gradually as the medicine wore off, I gained witnessing consciousness. There'd be other times in the ceremonies when I would be sitting strong and tall and feeling everything that was coming up, but there was clearly,
Mm-hmm.
a self that was in this position of a transcendent function
Mm-hmm.
or that could allow everything and could contain the whole ceremony, other people's pain with a certain equanimity and compassion,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I had varying experiences, but I do think that if you have um, that kind of meditation practice going into these ceremonies, it can be very,
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't want to spend your entire experience
Mm-hmm.
regressed,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And what you're also alluding to there is the role of the shaman or the container, the community, the people with you to hold the space for you to become the regression, to become the unconscious thing, to go deep enough to remember.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a sense, you recruit the community and the shaman to be
Yeah.
your witness
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
because
Yeah.
it's you don't have that function in the moment. So um, yeah.
Okay, so who is the witness for people right now? Like when people are out there, you obviously our community. When community is so fractured, where does the witness go, and how do we bring it back? How do we bring it back? How can people feel that support again when there's so much fear in the nervous system that's bubbling up? Where
Hmm.
how do they navigate that transition back to a safe place in community?
Yeah, it's a really good question because like the whole practice of psychotherapy basically is being in relationship with your client
Mm-hmm.
with enough authenticity and compassion that they're willing to trust you again. And the
Mm-hmm.
moment a client decides I can trust,
Mm-hmm.
the healing has happened
Yeah.
because it's trust that's been broken.
Right.
But that process takes as long as it takes. Everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
And my commitment as a therapist is just to be with
Mm-hmm.
in that compassionate state and
Mm-hmm.
in a certain tenderness.
Yeah.
Um, so, and it requires sometimes just immense patience,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where if you push too hard, it's going to break down because they're going to feel under pressure. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how, like, I haven't thought a lot about how we do that as a society, like,
Mm-hmm.
except by, coming, we can invite people over now, maybe, like, it's like have a barbecue. I mean, that,
Yeah.
that helps,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I
Yeah.
don't know how else to do it except like
Yeah.
slowly reintroduce ourselves to other human beings who,
Yeah.
we can once again feel connected. And
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that, but
Yeah, no, I think that that's the way to go. But it's interesting in that renegotiation. It seems to me that there's different communities that are doing it at different paces. Like you say, the patience level, like it's kind of like different pods exploring this reintegration at different speeds, which is probably the way it needs to go. And yeah, so I guess
And I don't know how it's ultimately going to go, because now, variants are being reintroduced,
yeah,
and
yeah.
uh, so, but I do notice where I'm living,
Mm-hmm.
like more and more people are walking into stores without masks, and certainly outside without masks, and but
Mm-hmm.
then there are those who are more frightened, and they're
Yeah.
masking up everywhere, and so
Mm-hmm.
we'll have to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah. Yeah. So to that end, I guess we briefly alluded to this before we came live, but if there is the reality is for us in these times, and there's something happening towards uh, evolution that's positive. How do you,
Hmm.
how do you see that? How do you see that in terms of trauma resolution on an individual and collective stage? And then how do you see us how do you see us staying grounded in that drip of disclosure, if you want to call it that?
Yeah. Well, I do think that there are practices that can help us to, like one practice that I find really helpful is like, uh, this work of feeling into a central channel that comes in through, the crown chakra, and goes all the way through, and the central axis right down into the earth, and just to imagine that there is light
Mm-hmm.
constantly
Right.
running through our system. And so to really have practices that help us stay connected
Mm-hmm.
um, to to the light.
So like,
And if we happen to have sensitivity in relation to ancestral work,
mm-hmm.
or spiritual guides, then really call upon the healthy ancestors, the spiritual guides, the any kinds of energetic entities that are supporting us as and our species in terms of our evolution to in and towards. My bias is that we are evolving in and towards being um, being the local manifestation of love.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about the universe being for us, it's my experience that there is some great mystery, some intelligence that is, and the world love
Mm-hmm.
describes that to me, that is living us,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the container for all the darkness,
Mm-hmm.
all the suffering. It doesn't resolve anything to have felt into this and to
Mm-hmm.
know that we are being allured in and towards love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it doesn't resolve the mystery of evil, the mystery of darkness, the mystery of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
but it contains it. And in and through that experience of the heart of the universe being love,
Mm-hmm.
I can find ways to fall into that.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's not on me and it's not on you to engineer the new utopia.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is precisely the mistake that human beings make in the absence of the experience of this kind of divine energy that I'm talking about, is that you remove that, and all of a sudden anxiety comes online, that if we're not engineering utopia,
Mm-hmm.
we're screwed.
Yeah.
So you get what comes online is this transhumanist agenda,
Mm-hmm.
the wedding of the human and the machine,
Mm-hmm.
of the technological and the human, and you get these hybrid, this fantasy of sort of
Mm-hmm.
the hybrid human.
Yeah.
And I think that's a dangerous, like personally,
Mm-hmm.
uh, like I would say, based on my experience, just be very careful with that,
Mm-hmm.
with the hubris of thinking that it's all on us
Yeah.
to engineer the next iteration of the human, of what it means to be human. I think it takes us in a risky, dangerous direction.
Yeah.
So so to have this experience that all of it is infused with love, that this love is permeating it
Mm-hmm.
and drawing us towards fuller expressions of love,
Mm-hmm.
is to be able to drop,
Mm-hmm.
to feel safe, to have a sense of humor, to experience beauty,
Mm-hmm.
to let be,
Mm-hmm.
to give up uh, uh, an overbearing ambition
Mm-hmm.
um, in life. And I think this is what the Jews give to the human species, is this practice of the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, you're just not allowed to do anything to improve upon creation as it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a beautiful
Mm-hmm.
aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Do nothing to improve upon creation, rather bask in the beauty and the glory of what is in front of your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Like bring
Mm-hmm.
bring that into perspective
Mm-hmm.
as a way of retaining your humanity and cultivating your humanity in response to these conditions of fear.
Mm-hmm. That is a beautiful, beautiful description of how to play with light and how it includes darkness. I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to that, Bruce. Thank you.
Mm,
Um, the thing that I feel, and I agree with you that the transhuman, the techno machine that is based on ego, and it's based on this heavy sense of responsibility that is destined, like anything that like a captain of a ship, to go down with the ship. And so I wonder, if that wound, that trauma wound, is not, how much of it is connected to a core wound of abandonment, not just from mother and father in our life, but Mother Earth, and the trust that is broken in the Western psyche with the microbial world and all of the animals and all of the plants, and this isolation that happens with housing and society, where we try to control nature, keep it out. So I wonder how much of that you've seen in your own life or your own practice, where people get to this core abandonment with Mother Earth, or is that just too hippy dippy?
it's right on,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned. The whole modernist enterprise for the last 400 years has been really about separating ourselves from Earth and orienting from a place of domination over and manipulation of Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and facilitated by this illusion of the Earth being inert matter.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, in this materialistic vision of life, all there is matter,
Mm-hmm.
but the matter's dead. It's inert. So you might as well exploit it
Mm-hmm.
to serve our agenda of quote unquote improving
Mm-hmm.
conditions. The alternative is, of course, the indigenous way, which is to enter into a relationship with the living
Mm-hmm.
intelligence
Mm-hmm.
of the mother, And this is one of the benefits of psychedelics, is that what happens is that Earth awakens before your eyes. You see the trees as occasions of loving presence. You see leaves on the trees, the wind blowing through them, but they're waving at you. It's all very personal. It's like flowers are here for medicine, and plants are here and the whole thing is is a living, alive manifestation of this love we were talking about. So we're in such a state of separation that surely, at the same time as we're healing our personal traumas, there's this fundamental underlying trauma of separation from Earth, of that sense that we don't belong to Earth.
Yeah. We've got to go to Mars, right?
We got to go to the moon. We got to go to Mars. We got to go off planet. And the spiritual expression of this has always been sort of the Gnostic tendency to see Earth and the body. The goal is to escape Earth, go up and out. So if you come across any spiritualities which have as the goal some kind of transcendent state that takes us back into the realm of spirit, you're contending with a Gnostic orientation. But there are other spiritualities and more indigenous sensibilities that never lost connection to that, but were deeply grounded in the sense of Earth as mother, of inhabiting body, of accepting the limitations of time and space, and undergoing those limitations willingly, which is to suffer those limitations willingly, rather than in our anxiety try to transcend those limitations. Always transcend. It's up and up and out, because we refuse to suffer what's ours to suffer. And I just mean by suffer to undergo reality as it is. We're embodied. We are under the conditions of time and space. Inhabit it more deeply. Feel the earth as mother. And what happens in the medicine as well, we're often shown our own death. And we get teachings about death. And you realize that death is not the opposite of life. It's just part of the rhythm of life. It's just an aspect of life. But we've set up this thing of death as anti-life. So all medical models are, we got to do everything to prevent death. Well, when you get over the fear of that, there's no need to go up and out. Just go in. Down and in is the direction of healing. Staying connected to this, but down and in. And the reason we don't want to go there is because it's because there's a ton of grief. That's what awaits us, to go down and in.
Yeah.
Is just a pool of grief.
Yeah.
But the gift of it is if we'll undergo that, is that compassion comes back online for ourselves. Our hearts are broken, tenderness rises up for ourselves, and then spreads out to those around us. And suddenly we learn what it feels like to contain all the darkness, that we're big enough to contain it all within our heart, because of this sense of this compassionate presence that comes back online.
Lovely. So I guess we're reaching our question and answer period, and I'm going to ask one more question before we get there, and that is, what examples do you see in the world right now, or do you foresee in the world, where this masculine and feminine up down duality is being resolved and balanced in a more sustainable, powerful way, or do you see that absent from the conversation, or too absent?
It's interesting. I mean, my reference point is the work I do with my clients and with myself, and where is that balance within myself. But I think to the extent that we bring awareness to the balance of that sort of deep receptivity
Mm-hmm.
and relationality,
Mm-hmm.
and from that place, engage the agentic part of us to manifest, which is, and I think there are things happening in the world which reflect that. I mean, there's a real movement towards biodynamic farming.
Mm-hmm.
There are increasingly, I hear about people wanting to sort of live in community.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a direct expression of the feminine and masculine, but I'm curious, what comes to your mind, like when you ask that, Keith?
I didn't have an answer for it, actually. I know that it's sort of been out there in the ether, prophesized that we're going to see this eagle condor sort of balance of masculine, feminine energies, and live into a time of heart where we can feel the deep feelings of anger, fear, grief, in order to move through them and reconnect with purpose, joy, and love. I haven't thought about how that's manifesting externally, because like you, I can only reference it from my own life and my own family. And so I try to, we have practices in our family that bring that into gratitude practice, and then my work with clients and my interactions with the community. So I think that this is like a trap that you alluded to earlier, where we can wait for that integration of those two things to happen on a political or a global level, or something top down, which is the antithesis of that integration, because it again appeals to a patriarchal savior to come fix something that.
Right.
So maybe it is the individual journey, awakening journey through these times, that's going to help us, get back to community in a more meaningful, deeper earth, earth relationship that we've lost. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that happens, with trauma is that often, either the deep feminine or the deep masculine gets really wounded in that, so we're having to find ways to heal, sometimes both, what the deep feminine, what the sacred feminine means, what the sacred masculine looks like and feels like in our life.
Nice. Yeah, we could keep riffing and riffing, I'm sure, but let's put a pause in there and invite Katie back onto the scene here, and see what questions have been generated so far, if any. I haven't been watching. Let me see if I can toggle the screen here.
There's a beautiful prayer there.
Yeah.
By Laura.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
We don't have really any questions quite yet, but I think honestly it might be because everyone was just so engulfed in what you were saying, Bruce. Like, it was so beautiful. I felt so calm. It was
nice
so lovely. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, we got a lot of people saying they really, yeah, it was really well received. So yeah, but if anybody has any questions or anything that they would like to be touched on, or feel free to write it in the chat. We can give you a minute or two to do that.
I would also invite everyone to reflect on their own life, whether or not it's, their own healing journey, where they've come up against fear or grief or anger and been able to hold space for it enough for it to come back online and to come back to wholeness. I'll share one thing that some of you might have heard was a story from my own ayahuasca experience, where I was also in Mexico, and I became a spider, and in that moment realized how much rage had been in my nervous system that I'd never really allowed myself to feel. And that actually helped me do a lot of healing around masculine energy in my own body, by feeling that immense amount of rage and anger, and actually then being able to express it through through a purge in the case of but I actually feel like that makes people safer. Humans is when they feel, like Bruce was saying, the line between suicide and homicide, and how we kind of float down the line. It's nice to be able to feel that level of rage, to feel that you could kill another human, but that you processed it so you don't have to.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I just think, I think, in general, these times are really calling upon that, for people to breathe into difficult feelings, because the external environment is just so triggering. Like the news is often triggering of fear right now. And fear acts as the Kundalini awakener for all these other buried emotions of shame and grief and whatever else.
I think
Yeah, Artie Lang said that, we're fundamentally, humans are afraid of three things: death, other people, and our own minds. Like, we're psychophobic, because what's in there is that level of rage, that disowned rage, because we're unconscious of it. But, it's the shadow. And as long as it's repressed, we're in much more danger of kind of creating suffering because of it, than if we actually allow ourselves to feel it, to see it, to own it, and not be afraid. Like, a lot of people don't want to go in because they've been running for a lifetime from certain feelings. If they stop, the feelings are going to catch up with them, and so we just keep on the run, or we keep drinking or taking more opiates, because to stop and to feel into what's actually there is frightening.
is there something, and Laura has something, so two things. Laura was saying that she moved away from a busy city and into Comox Valley, and she found she could connect more to stillness and process more. And I think that a lot of people are finding that now, especially with COVID, and having that realization that, oh, I can work away from this. I don't have to be in the big city. And my question is too, I think a lot of people are starting to understand that trauma, we have unresolved trauma or emotions that we haven't processed and met. But I think when they come up, it's like, what is that first thing that you can do to catch yourself in the moment when you want to run, but you like, it's that tendency, like, I want to grab the cigarette or the drink or watch the TV or whatever. What can you do in that moment? I think that's where people need the most support, because you sometimes just don't know what to do.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, if you can really catch that moment, that's the key. First of all, make a commitment to catching those moments, like, just, really. And then I thought I saw you, Katie, just take a little breath even as you were saying that. It's like, if it comes up, then just like breathe into it, and face into it rather than, but maybe just taking a deep breath. And this is where the practice of meditation can happen, is where you just have made a fundamental commitment to allow reality as it's arising in you to be what it is. Once you've made that, once you've dedicated yourself to that path, then almost automatically you've created space for whatever is going to arise. But that's the key. It's like catching it that moment. I'm so pissed, like I'm so angry, and just saying it out loud, like just sharing it with somebody. I'm just so enraged right now, and having it heard.
Some sort of release in some way, or a witness and release.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in relationship, as we know, that I statement, instead of the projection of you are making me angry, that I feel angry, is so key, that little switch that can get turned on in our conscious mind around that moment.
Yeah, because, as I was sharing before, what happens is that whatever the other person has said to make you so angry, it's like it's just been the trigger. But what's coming up is that there's a whole story that's starting to form that's based on those core unconscious beliefs. So we're certain in that moment that you have just deeply offended us and that you're against us. And, but so it's like learning over time and practice that that's the narrative that needs to be deconstructed in that moment. And like you said, Keith, it's like in that moment, just go, I am really angry. I don't know what's going on, but boy, when you said that, this is what came up for me. And that begins the process of.
Cool. Well, thank you, Bruce. This has been awesome and very enlightening, as I knew it would be, and I hope we can do it again sometime. But if there aren't any more questions, do you happen to have a copy of your book that you can show? I want people to read it.
I don't.
You're not a very good self-promoter.
I am not a good salesperson. It's called Dismantled. Yeah.
Dismantling the marketing machine.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's Dismantled by Bruce Sanguin. You can find it everywhere books are sold.
Everywhere, yeah.
Everywhere, including Mars. So
we have a few things. Sorry to butt in, but Laura said learning about EFT. She's learning about EFT. So that's emotional freedom technique. I believe it's like a lot of tapping on certain points on the body while you say phrases. And as the emotion comes up, you continue to like tap through it. And that helps to process it. And then Liz says, maybe it will not stop you in the initial moment, but a creative outlet such as writing, poetry, or artwork can break patterns in the long run.
Absolutely. I think that's more speaking to the daily practice that prevents a lot of that, whether it's meditation or any creative outlet where the pineal gets to experience the universe or joy, love, and happiness. And see what needs to be expressed from the subconscious. I think that practice is so important, especially in these times. And that's one of the benefits, to speak of, the integration that I feel is happening, is when people have slowed down over the last year, they have actually started doing, in many cases, more self-care and more of these practices, these creative practices, realizing that work isn't going to bring them everything that they wanted, maybe, and recalibrate. Maybe they got let go and they need to recalibrate towards something that makes their heart sing in a more creative way. So maybe there are
the tether to home.
The tether,
right.
It's like the tether to home.
Yeah.
Like art and creativity, it gives you space to remember yourself and to remember, I think, like where you come from, and and even to hear information that you might need to hear from your inner self or your higher self or whatever, you actually have that space to receive. Whereas I think in daily life, we're just going. And sometimes you don't even have the space to receive, like, what do I want to do for my career or whatever it might be? Whereas art or poetry gives you the room, and meditation or whatever it is, forest bathing, to actually receive what needs to come through or trying to come through.
So I guess I have one more question before we leave, and that is that if someone is wanting to explore psychedelic psychotherapy or this kind of therapy that you allude to, where you're experiencing these very deep unconscious beliefs, what avenues, what can they Google? Do you Google psychedelic psychotherapist? Is there some sort of organization where you come across legitimate people? Because and we're coming into a time where we're trying to legitimize this kind of therapy and this medicine, where there's a witness that can hold that loving presence. But how do you find good people?
You can go to maps, maps.ca or com. They have a list of therapists who are working with psychedelics, and you could find one in your area. So that's a good resource. And increasingly, they're doing training of these therapists. I think that's probably the best way to go.
Right on. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you so much for being
Yeah,
here.
Yeah, nice to be with you too.
Yeah. Thank
Keith,
you,
thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Katie.
Thanks, folks. Good to be
Okay.
with you.
Goodbye, everybody.
bye.